Before we get started, this video has been on a long-awaited request by many as Subscribe Star Bros. Since we're all dealing with skyrocketing temperatures because we aren't sacrificing enough maidens to the thing that crawls among the woods, let's all sit down and talk about a movie that's about the end of the world. Though this probably isn't going to go how you think. It's complicated. Mad Max. Yep, it's finally time. So to get the obvious out of the way, Persona 4 video is very much in the works. So in the works, this is actually being handled by an outside editor. Yeah, I finally broke down and hired a dude to help me edit. Yeah, he's a very happy Scandinavian boy. But yeah, I just need to find someone to help me out. The schedule has been hectic, and I feel bad that so many videos have been on the back burner. So fuck it. Regardless, we're here to talk about a super fun Australian movie. One with a pretty crazy story and how it was made. Now, everyone knows what Mad Max is. It's kind of one of the post-apocalypse movies, inspiring heaps upon heaps of franchises since it was created. And those franchises end up kind of becoming legends in their own right. Which is funny because the actual franchise is relatively small. You have the original trilogy, Mad Max, The Road Warrior, and Beyond Thunderdome. And then you have the sort of sequel, Fury Road, and then finally the prequel to that with Furiosa, which is officially a spinoff. It's only around 5 movies, 3 of which came out in the 70s and 80s, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of a small little pool here considering how massive it's really become. Inspiring franchises like Fist North Star and fucking Fallout. You'd think it would be milked to death for all it's worth like Death Wish, but nah, not really. And the funny part about all this is how quaint Mad Max 1 actually is. Yeah, the actual original 1979 film has one hell of a story to how it was made. Directed by George Miller, who wrote it alongside James McCausland. Mad Max was a super tight indie movie. How tight? Well, it was made for only like 350 to 400,000 Australian dollars. Financed bit by bit using guerrilla tactics like not even applying for permits for certain scenes. And George Miller wasn't even really a filmmaker at the time. Yeah, the guy who made one of the most influential film series ever made, the guy who defined the nuclear apocalypse genre, who made one of the most iconic characters in cinema, he never once touched film school before any of this. He was a fucking doctor. He worked in the ER at a hospital at Sydney and took note of the variety of injuries and car crash deaths he would deal with. While he was doing his residency, he ran into Byron Kennedy, an indie filmmaker who was still in film school at the time. The two hit it off and became pretty good friends, producing a short together that got some heat to it, Violence in the Cinema. This worked out well, earning multiple awards at the festivals they showed it off at. Eventually, this grew into an idea, to pay tribute to the silent films of the bygone era. A stunt-driven effects movie that depicted graphic, grounded violence. And that's how it all started. Yeah, the actual idea for Mad Max was pretty humble. It was meant to pay tribute to guys like Buster Keaton, the stuntmen who defined really early cinema. Hell, the entire reason for the post-apocalypse setting is because it was really the only thing that made sense for how they could stitch all the set pieces into the story. Everything about the production of Mad Max screamed small scale and passion project. If you want to know an even crazier story, a lot of the actual extras that played bikers, the main gang, they weren't actors. They were an actual motorcycle club in Australia that George Miller met and offered to be in the movie. He paid them in beer. Yeah, they didn't take a paycheck. He literally just bought them cases of beer and they were happy to show up. Their bikes are their actual bikes they would ride. They even had to ride all the way from Sydney to Melbourne because they couldn't afford to fly them out there. The crew had to avoid using walkie-talkies on set so they wouldn't alert the police to what they're doing. Because remember, they avoided getting permits to shoot on location. Eventually, they did get caught, though, and the police actually decided to help out. Yeah, the local cops were interested in what they were putting together, so they volunteered to escort them around and close off roads for shoots. Of course, this isn't to say it all went smoothly. Obviously, they ran into a whole host of issues and stresses, especially in the beginning when they were just getting off the ground. Hell, George Miller quit for a while and had to be talked into coming back. Yeah, there was a good chance that the second biggest name attached to the film would have walked away. But he didn't, so the timeline has not been thrown to chaos. Of course, this is all just behind the scenes stuff. What about the actual movie? In all honesty, it's shockingly quaint compared to what would later come. Mad Max 1's very different beast from the rest of the franchise. For one, the nuclear apocalypse that everyone knows with Mad Max, yeah, it doesn't happen. Yeah, the main thing people think of when they hear Mad Max, that's not actually in the first movie. It's a detail that came later with Road Warrior and Thunderdome. Instead, the apocalypse in Mad Max is a slow, painful death, a growing anarchy due to resource shortages. George Miller was inspired by the oil crisis in the 70s when the Middle East decided to kind of just fuck with everyone because Middle East. And he basically thought of what would happen if it just didn't stop. The increased desperation causing conflict, ecological damage to the planet, and the slow downfall of the modern world. Mad Max 1 is all about the world bit by bit falling apart. When the film begins, there's still a sense of law and order. The police are just barely able to keep things going, and while the gangs are growing more ruthless and violent, and by the end, there's just Max, the lone wanderer traveling the wasteland as it rots away into endless nothing. So really, the world Mad Max builds is more horrifying to think about than just nuclear apocalypse. Nukes will drop in the setting, but it comes later. Instead, the world of Mad Max is all about the slow bleed of civilization. Every single day, you're seeing just another bit of normal life die, taken over by anarchy and savagery. It's a very different idea for an apocalypse, one that's actually pretty creative. Most of the time in end-of-the-world stories, they rush to the collapse of the foundations, that the world will die in the blink of an eye. Seeing the process throughout the story is what makes Mad Max different from others of the genre, even others that went on to inspire. Now, this is all just the first film. By Road Warrior, you're already seeing the landscape scarred and dead to the point you can tell the old world's gone. But the first film has a special place due to its ability to show a slow decay. Now, it's 100% because budget issues. You can't exactly show burned out cities when you don't have the money to make it work. Plus, the idea of complete civilization collapse probably wasn't even a thought yet. It was still mainly a grounded enough idea to where civilization was still going. It's just kind of living in a weird hyper-reality. But it's still something that makes the first film special when you think about it in the larger trilogy. Another thing that makes it special? Well, Max actually doesn't have too much of a presence in this one than you would think. Yeah, Max Rockatansky, the main fucking character, is kind of on the sidelines for a while. Instead, a lot of the focus is on Goose. He drives a lot of the plot in the beginning, and it switches over to Max to finish things out. If you've never seen Mad Max, you might be baffled hearing this, but it's actually kind of a common element in the series. Max is the protagonist, but he's more like an observer watching things fall apart. He'll do things in the plot, and the endings always revolve around him, but he shares the screen time with other characters. Despite Mel Gibson being easily the biggest name attached to the film, Steve Bisley as Goose is kind of more of a leading man until other things happen to him, which I won't spoil for now. Now granted, a lot of it's because this was Mel Gibson's breakout role. Yeah, he didn't have the reputation that he did when Mad Max came out. This is what got him on the screen in the first place. And he was able to take that and fucking run with it. And of course, we gotta address the elephant in the room, which is, well, Mel Gibson himself. How was he as Max in his first actual big role? What do you think? It's fucking Mel Gibson. Yeah, the guy's a legend. Is he batshit crazy? Yeah. Does he have some personal demons? Putting it very lightly. But he's a damn good actor. Hell, he's so good at playing an Aussie that a lot of people at first thought he was Australian. But he's not. He was born in New York and moved to Sydney when he was 12. And despite living in Australia for a good chunk of his life, he apparently never developed a full accent naturally. He could mimic one very well, but he stayed default American English, to the point that when it came time to dub the film over when it was released worldwide, they didn't really have to change much of how he talked. Now there's some back and forth on this. Some say the dub was made purely due to bad sound mixing, more than making it easier to understand for foreign audiences. Others are dead set that it was to make the slang and accents easier to pick up on. You can buy the DVD that has both audio tracks, so the differences are clear. Personally, yeah, I lean on the latter, that it's for the accents. The slang in the original version is very thick, and it's easy for somebody who's never heard it before to get confused fast. But what's the actual story of Mad Max? What actually happens in the movie? Well, the story follows an overworked and underpaid unit of police officers in Australia, just barely keeping things together as a worldwide ecological crisis ravages the land. As they desperately try to keep order, a powerful and sadistic biker gang goes around wreaking havoc, led by the sadistic Toe Cutter, played by Hugh Keys Byrne, who would later go on to play Immortan Joe in Fury Road. Fun bit of detail there. Still, Toe Cutter and his gang arrive in town after the death of Knight Rider, a fellow biker that led the police on an intense and violent chase before finally being killed. Toe Cutter arrives to avenge his friend, leading to an ever-escalating cycle of violence. Now, as stated, Mel Gibson's character Max is the protagonist, but he tends to take a back seat in the beginning of the film, sharing time with the other officers and Goose. As the story goes on, he gets a clearer focus, eventually becoming the last man standing. Not every other officer dies, they simply leave the story as the stakes get higher and more personal for Max, going from a general story about the decay of society and urban violence into a character-driven revenge story, though the exacts are spoiler territory. which I guess we can talk about. I mean, the movie's almost like 50 years old, so yeah, sure, why not? Let's put up a spoiler warning. Yeah, in case you guys haven't seen it yet, this is your last chance to see the movie before we go into the specifics of the story. Watch it, it's great. It's a great time. All-time classic. So Mad Max's story is pretty simple, all things considered. All the details about resource shortages and the fall of the modern world, that's background details that aren't given a lot of attention. In fact, they're pretty easy to miss if you aren't paying attention to them. Kept in news reports that aren't focused on piecing together clues left behind in certain scenes, like the police station being so run down that it literally looks like a half-finished building. It doesn't even have a jail cell. Society is still around, there's even courts and lawyers still active, but the air's getting tense. Something is brewing and everyone feels it. The bikers themselves are total maniacs, rambling in essentially their own language and not even trying to pretend they have any humanity left. Acting like full-blown bandits as they hunt travelers on the road. It seems like they're simply ahead of the curve considering what's coming down the line. Due to their war on the police getting nastier, it seems like the situation is just going to get worse and worse. The police are already stretched thin, and these lunatics are exasperating as much as humanly possible, both out of a grudge and just due to sadistic pleasure. Eventually, Goose is crippled after an ambush by the bikers, lit on fire and burned beyond the point of recognition, leaving Max as the only officer really capable of handling things. And he says, fuck that. Yeah, Max actually tries to back out at first. Goose was his partner and best friend, and his attack reminds Max of how dangerous their job truly is. They could end up dead at any moment to just plain bad luck. Max has a wife and young son to think about. He can't afford to get killed over this. And there's a dark part of him that seems to like the carnage that he's starting to become afraid of. So he tries to leave, retiring with his family and enjoying what little time he has left with them. Unfortunately, Toe Cutter and his guys don't agree on that idea, still actively stalking Max and his family at every step, even hunting them down all the way to the farm of a family friend, and killing his wife and son. Left with nothing else to live for, Max dedicates to revenge, hunting the gang down and killing them one by one. So as you can see, it's a relatively simple revenge story. Bad guys going after the protagonist, push it too far, and end up on the other side of the gun. What makes Mad Max stand out is the style, how the film tells the story. Despite the setting being known as an over-the-top diesel punk world, the first movie's pretty grounded. The violence is never bombastic, it's understated and grisly. A large plot point is the cops not being able to arrest one of the bikers for clearly being an accessory to a violent attack due to a legal loophole. The first movie still abides by the idea of a reality. It's just twisted and exaggerated in some forms. People are going crazy, but the world's still operating off the same rules. You can see psychotic biker gangs ambushing people on the road one scene, then cut to a diner still operating like nothing ever happened in the next. Now, the movie is very stunt-oriented. It's about the spectacle of seeing these large metal beasts smash into things. So does the action hold up after all this time? Shockingly so. The action in Mad Max really does need to be seen to be believed. The car chases nail the weight, speed, and feel of these intense battles. It's a genuine marvel how well it holds up. From the beginning chase with Knight Rider all the way to the final duel with Toe Cutter, it helps that a lot of the stunts are real. They actually drove these cars and took a lot of time and effort to make the stunts play out how they wanted them to, both due to the time period and the budget. They didn't have the money to cheat like how big studios could, simulating crashes under much more controlled circumstances, and they didn't have the luxury of CGI to fake anything. This was pure guerrilla filmmaking. If you wanted a shot, you had to do it yourself. The fact that they were able to do all this with zero onset deaths and minimal injuries is very impressive. Now, it's an exaggeration to say that there were no injuries. You kind of see that float around a few times, but no, they 100% happened. Like during the bridge scene when Max drives through the gang, you can clearly see a guy get smacked in the back of the head with one of the bikes as he crashes. Yeah, that dude must be really thankful he wore a helmet, because that shit looked like it hurt. And the final crash with Toe Cutter looks fucking gnarly. Granted, it's very obviously a mannequin, but it's a pretty convincing one. Just seeing it get sucked under the tire of the truck, it nails that goddamn vibe. Mad Max 1 just has a good sense of making everything look like it hurts. From how Goose is burned alive and left as human jerky, to how Max gets shot and his arm gets ran over at the end. It helps make the violence feel visceral and satisfying. One of the aspects that went on to kind of become a part of the identity to the series, it's not the goriest franchise around. Mad Max doesn't really have anything that's too out there or hardcore, but the violence always feels satisfying. Even the weakest films in the series, Thunderdome and Furiosa, still nail the action to the point they're well remembered in that regard. Even a weak Mad Max movie is still considered pretty damn fun. which is a good track record, all things considered. Now, one thing to mention is that, well, the cars are kind of also characters themselves. Yeah, the identity of the franchise mainly comes from the cars. There are all sorts of wacky designs and interesting looks to them all, sticking to this kind of like neo-retro vibe, where they're modern-ish cars, at least for the time period, souped up to look a lot more guerrilla and improvised, and you have older cars that kind of get the exact same treatment, ironically being boosted up in order to be a lot more usable in this new landscape. Now granted, the first movie doesn't really touch on this, mainly because the only cars you're really seeing are, well, the police cars, the Interceptors and the Pursuit Special. But by Road Warrior and Thunderdome, the cars have become a major identity to the franchise. And by Fury Road, they're literally worshipping cars as a religion. So, you know, kind of a big part of the franchise. And a funny part about this is that they didn't really treat the cars all that well on set. I mean, obviously they're smashing them to pieces for shoots, and a lot of the stunts revolve around the cars getting their asses whooped. But you would think that they would at least try to preserve them or sell them off to a museum, something like that, you know, get some money out of them. No, a lot of them were just kind of given to whoever wanted them at the time. The actual Pursuit Special, the most iconic car of the series, Max's car, was sold to the mechanic guy. Yeah, the mechanic character, he had it for a while. And then he sold it to a buddy who owned a junkyard, and that's when it was found decades later and actually refurbished and taken to a museum. That's not a joke. This poor little car, despite being one of the most famous cars in all of movie history, was sitting in a junkyard for a good chunk of time just because they didn't know what they had. Kind of one of those funny ironies when you think about it. Now, another thing to mention is that this grounded, gritty style is quickly abandoned as the franchise went on. The first movie stands out for how different it is to the rest of the series, a decently realistic vigilante story, though the other films kept the relatively real look and feel. They all relatively looked the same, they all kind of felt the same, still maintaining a gritty visual style, but the franchise kind of went on to be more diesel punk fantasy. The bikers Mad Max 1 look like actual bikers. I mean, because they literally were, but the point is, they still look like guys you could see walking down the street. Batshit nuts, they're completely insane, but you could see guys like this existing. Then you get Road Warrior, where you have Lord Humongous and his army of gimps. Very obviously, the character design shifted as the movies went on, as it had to apply more of the end of the world aspect to it all. But the cinematography never really changed. That's one of the reasons why the whole trilogy genuinely feels like a trilogy. It's not like 3 completely different movies slammed together. It feels like chapters of a story. It's the same world, it's just getting more deranged and violent and psychotic as time goes on. The fact that Max starts off as a family man that's wronged by criminals and later becomes this mythical warrior traveling the land. He's basically Conan if he had a shotgun and a seething hatred of kangaroos. An element that helps Mad Max really stand out from other films from this era. Everything about it is just weird when you think about it. A vigilante story turning into this trilogy of epics that serve as chapters in this larger saga for Max as a character. Hell, seeing the way the franchise would later treat him, you can see the original movie as a sort of retelling of his origin. Specifically, a retelling, and I know that sounds really fucking weird to say considering it's the first one, but this is what I mean. It's like a story told by people that met him and want to share his legend. That's why reality is kinda there, but some details aren't clear or seem nonsensical. They understand the idea of the police, but not the specifics. They understand kinda how the old world was, but not the finer details. You can see the beginnings of the vernacular the franchise would become famous for, starting to develop with certain characters. Granted, it's mainly Aussie slang, but Road Warrior then develops that into its own in-universe language and dialect that shows that humanity's losing its mind. They understand the concepts, but the way to describe it get more scrambled and rough. So as an opening chapter, Mad Max is a very different beast than what you'd expect out of any of the movies, but it's still a damn good time. A fun, simple story, memorable characters with tight dialogue that's fun to listen to, and action that you're not forgetting anytime soon. I highly recommend Mad Max. It's just a fantastic time you will not regret checking out. Hell, it's practically required viewing if you like post-apocalypse media. And it's kind of the granddaddy to all sorts of modern titans, still inspiring media to this very day. There was a Total Warhammer trailer styled off of Fury Road. Yeah, it's just fucking good. Well, it's there to say. Well, there is one more thing. Gamer subs, use code TAL at checkout. Use the code. Use the code. Be a rocker, be a roller, be a Gamer subs orderer. Use the code. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Mad Max. It's a damn good film that holds up. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys. Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.